Hi, David.
Hi, Charles.
It's the end of the week.
Yes, how are you?
I'm very good. Excited for the weekend.
Perfect.
Got some squash to play,
Okay.
and then, of course, some shopping.
Okay. I'll be skiing with plenty of snow.
At Bromo?
Yes.
Very nice. Very nice. I went skiing at Sutton last week, and it was beautiful.
Good.
Spectacular, actually. But we're going to do Behind the Headlines.
Yeah.
And not obviously related to the supply chain, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
But kind of two things happened in the last week. Everybody probably knows about it. Number one, we have this DeepSeek AI that was released by a team out of China.
Yeah.
That's sort of shocking the world because their claim, not verified, is that it only cost about $6.5 million to build, compared to the the hundreds of millions, if not billions, that the American teams have spent. I did read this morning that some people are saying that the $6.5 million might have been just the training of the model portion, and not including all the other costs. Which, even if that's true, so what? It's still a huge step forward in the AI world.
Yeah, and done with chips that are not as performing as those that the OpenAI and others have
right,
access
because
to.
these people would be operating under the restrictions where they have sort of older generation chips to
Correct.
use. And so that's also very cool.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have a new administration down in the U.S., and one of the things that they've announced is a $500 billion investment. Stargate, which is Stargate like moonshot. It's a plan. I really don't know what. Tell me about what exactly are they going to do with that money?
So it's Japan, SoftBank. Then you got all the big ones. Ultimately, it's to build the infrastructure, the AI infrastructure.
Great.
To support ultimately the ability to continue to grow and build and train models and have more capacity.
Well, okay. So as we say that, right, the infrastructure, and I'm sure that the average listeners, I know what the infrastructure is. But I think it's worth diving into it. And once you dive into it, you realize what the implications of $500 billion of spending in infrastructure really means. And, I, up until last year, had never even thought about the energy consumption of a Google search.
Yeah.
Never entered my mind. And I know that in theory, if I was in a test, if they said, true or false, a Google search consumes energy, I know the answer is true.
Yeah.
I would have thought of it as infinitesimally small, right?
Yeah, which a single Google search is probably true, but given the volume,
when you take billions of searches a day.
Yeah.
That adds up to something.
Yeah, correct.
But AI, an equivalent search in AI,
10 times.
10 times more consumptive of energy. And the reason is that when you query an AI, you're engaging an entire model, right? So almost like the sum of human knowledge is being engaged to answer that query.
Yeah.
And maybe when you think of this DeepSeek, I know one of the innovations is they've sort of partitioned, instead of having like one massive expert system, they have partitioned it into sort of like two layers of expertise. One layer that knows what expert to consult in their expert systems, and then another layer of individual expert systems, which is one way they got around to make the model more efficient.
But are you referring to the part where some claim that ultimately it used OpenAI to, let's say, kind of add the final touches to its ability?
I'm not making that claim.
Okay.
I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
This I'm really shooting from the hip. But what I understand is one of the efficiencies that they have created is sort of there's sort of like two layers to the model, where one layer takes your query, figures out what parts of the expert systems it needs to engage to get the answer, and therefore leaves the other parts of the, like, if your question's about the weather, it's not going to engage the part that's arts and culture, and, the experts. So it leaves that dormant, so it's attacking a more limited set of knowledge with any question it answers. I don't know. That's what I read. Whether it's true or not, we're just warehouse designers. Yeah. We don't know anything, right?
Yes.
But we do know this. Here's a fact that I astonished me. So Google search, we just said, okay, it's basically almost no energy, but it is energy. Multiply that by 1 billion searches a day or whatever the number is, and that's quite a whack of energy. And then you just said if Google search went away and then we replace it with AI, that would 10x the energy. And as models grow, at least in the way we've constructed them so far, that will grow as the models grow. But maybe DeepSeek will give us strategies to reduce that. Generating an image, and I just did one yesterday just for fun.
Pretty good too.
I went on, pretty good.
Yeah.
I went on and I built a presentation, and like, it created an image for me. And it was the first time I've ever done that. And then I find out today that just in my reading that image generation consumes the same energy it takes to charge your smartphone.
For a full charge. That's insane.
Insane. Yeah. Here's what's insane. Now I feel really guilty. It generated the first image. I didn't like it. I said, okay. I said, and you know, it's natural. I said, pretty good, but can you? Yeah. And then didn't like second version. It was only the third version. I said, close enough. I'll work with that. Yeah. So I've charged 3 smartphones in a matter of like 90 seconds. Yeah. Insane. Yeah. Insane.
Yeah, and there's a it's nearly impossible to, well, it's not nearly, it is impossible to, as we continue to, leverage these advancement in our day-to-day life or whatever, where it's being used, to ask people to moderate themselves and be cognizant of that kind of consumption. Because
last year was the first year in my 20 years of searching, not necessarily Google, but before Google was Ask Jeeves and NetSuite.
Yahoo.
No, not NetSuite. Netscape. NetSuite's much more sophisticated than Netscape. So we've been googling well before Google existed even, and never thought about it until last year. So now are we really going to stop ourselves from making images now that we can?
Of course not.
The applications for people like us, for students, for the world of just being able to create images, it's an irresistible advance in our ability to communicate with one another. So it's not going to happen. Yeah. We're going to be charging smartphones like crazy. Constantly. by now. That's to sensitize us to the fact that our own individual actions in interacting with AI, at its most basic, nascent, infant level, which is where it is today, consumes a whole lot of energy per task. And I read another statistic that I find amazing. If you take a next step and you go to the training of an AI model, they estimate, one analyst estimated, was the equivalent of watching Netflix nonstop, streaming Netflix on your TV nonstop for 183 years.
Yeah.
Like, just imagine how many times you would have watched every episode of Breaking Bad if you're streaming NetSuite for 183 years nonstop, 24/7.
Yeah.
Not even allowed to sleep.
Yeah.
And so that's another fun way of like understanding what power hogs these things are, and making the average citizen and our colleagues in the industry like really aware of the end, sort of not at the end, at the very beginning of the energy supply chain of AI. It's a massive beast. So I was reading another thing. If we go a step further, okay, so we got training models is an energy hog, making images, even just doing little queries. All of this is consuming way more energy than we think.
Yeah.
Right now, I think it's the International Energy Agency out of the UN calculated, they project by 2027, 2 years from now, the entire global consumption of energy
By AI applications.
just for AI, just AI, will be the equivalent to the state of Michigan's total energy consumption. I mean, it's crazy. The state of Michigan, 10 million people, Detroit, cars, all that good stuff. Amazing ice cream out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, but that's not a very energy efficient plant, I will point out. But other than that, I mean, the state of Michigan, imagine every power plant in Michigan, and all it's doing is running
Feeding.
AI applications for the world.
Yeah.
And this brings us to, where is all this energy getting consumed?
Well, yeah, in data centers. Yeah.
Right.
Data centers, which this data centers exists for forever. It's just that now they need to
Add AI applications.
Yeah. Well, their capacity has to augment in ways that are, I wouldn't say exponential, but accelerate the ability to treat all that.
Well, and again, so everyone knows what a data center is, kind of.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about what outside of AI are data centers doing?
Well, they're used right now for hosting application, cloud-based. Any organization that has that needs to run application on the cloud, well, that's the cloud ultimately.
Right. Like Netflix.
Yeah.
We just said 183 years of Netflix watching, right?
Yeah.
Well, where's all the Netflix content
Yeah.
sitting? In fact, I nearly said NetSuite again. Where's all NetSuite's
Yeah.
hosting happening?
Yeah.
All hosting, the internet is
The
sitting in
internet
data
itself,
centers,
yeah.
right? I mean, that's it. So here's a statistic. Right today, so data centers are as we just said, it's basically the internet, it's hosting, it's street, it's all of that, plus now AI, right? And we said that the global consumption of AI, of energy for AI, is about equivalent to the state of Michigan. The total energy consumption of the world's data centers currently is equal to
Canada's consumption.
the energy consumption of a G7 top 10 economy country, Canada.
Every piece,
You
every
know.
watt being consumed. Yeah.
And we per capita consume enormous amounts of energy in Canada, mostly to heat our houses. But I mean, like, that's one of the reasons. And we're sparsely populated, so transportation, both personal and commercial and industrial, is there are much longer trips involved. So we are relatively big energy consumers.
Yeah.
And our entire nation's energy consumption is equal to all the world's data centers.
Yeah.
That should,
Is insane.
right.
Yeah.
And it gets worse, David. It gets worse.
It gets worse
By
because
2027, we're expecting that global energy consumption for all the world's data centers to be equal not to Canada's energy consumption, but who?
Japan's.
With 3 times, well, maybe not 3, but 2.5 times our population.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Again, the number 3 or 4 or 5, a top 5 economy with more than 100 million people. And that is going to be 2 years from now.
And that increase is driven by the AI.
Right.
part. Yeah.
So if the entire country of Japan floated away and resettled on Mars, we would still need a Japan-like production powerhouse to keep our data centers running. And then if we go 2035,
10 years.
10 years, what are they projecting?
Well, the U.S.
Half the U.S.
Oh, I'm sorry. half the U.S.
which is a mind-boggling
Yeah.
number. Okay, imagine half the U.S. So the implications are pretty significant. The energy consumption part of it is straightforward, because that's, I mean, if we haven't made the point by now, you're not listening, because we kind of hammered it on your heads. But there's going to be a desperate need to increase energy consumption and therefore energy production to fuel all the growing need for data centers.
And just a note, as we were talking before this, when you think about energy requirements to run data centers, a significant part of it, or we believe a significant part of it, is to cool those data centers, because these,
Right.
generate vast amounts of heat.
Yeah, cooling is a huge part.
Yeah, and with Jeremy making some research, as much as
Half the energy in a data center is just cooling the data center.
Yeah, and then so why are all data centers not located in Canada or Minnesota
Or in the Antarctic.
Yeah, exactly. Is because there's a proximity element to it as
Right.
well.
So there is a need for some data center applications require proximity to the user or the consumer of that data center.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy. So I guess, I mean, I'll tell you a little anecdote. One of our clients was looking to expand a freezer, right? An industrial freezer, and cannot get the power. Can't get the power. The city will not commit to providing them the power they need to expand their freezer. So imagine that company's business is, hugely and
Constrained.
directly, immediately impacted by the fact that all levels of government are prioritizing energy production to go to data centers and not to other industrial activities. And my worry, I think the other headlines recently have demonstrated, as we're all kind of caught flat-footed on this, no one has been, and I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that critically. Like,
Yeah.
I had no idea, so who am I to?
Yeah.
But we're kind of caught flat-footed about how much energy AI requires and how much of a competitor against other industrial uses of energy it is becoming. And that every country, United States, Canada, the North American continent, has to have well thought out and not too slowly implemented plans for increasing power supply across all sources.
Yeah.
I'll give you a statistic, but I will admit I asked Gemini AI for this, so who knows? Sometimes it does get questions wrong. But we have something like 3 to 5 times more hydroelectric power potential in Canada than we are currently exploiting.
Well, yeah, that's amazing. And I heard also on a podcast that we both enjoy is it's not so much about a race to green energy. It's a race to
all energy.
Yeah.
It's with a preference for renewable energy.
Yeah.
But there's also green or carbonless non-renewable energy, such as nuclear.
Yeah.
Microsoft,
Bought
if
a
you think
plant.
about 3 Mile Island, which is famous for a partial meltdown that happened 1978, 79, something like that, which scared the whole world away from nuclear power. I mean, Chernobyl and Fukushima were actually even worse, but 3 Mile Island was the first scare. And that happened, there are two units, and Unit 1
it melted.
had a partial meltdown.
Meltdown is
and
now.
And Unit 2 kept running, and they shut it down in 2019.
Yep.
You can tell me.
Well, so then Microsoft has now made an offer to buy this nuclear plant in order to use it fully, and that the entire energy produced out of it would be used for its own
data centers.
Purpose.
And just to put it in perspective, that Unit 1 produces the equivalent energy to power 800,000 homes every year. And that's what Microsoft said. Oh, I'll sign that up. I'll make a 20-year commitment to buy all the power generated to power data centers. So that's a kind of example of how tech companies are thinking about this, and they're pushing their government. I mean, it's no accident that Inauguration Day, you've got all those techies, and you may, before you think conspiracy or anything like that, like sometimes the most obvious answer is the answer, which is there is a desperate need to get the energy problem solved in order to maintain a position of, if not dominance, at least prominence in the AI world, because the technology is so transformative for everyone. So the energy is one of the issues. The other thing that I think people don't, well, we talk about it sometimes in the news, but for supply chains, very, very important, is all of the data centers of the world and all of the end applications where AI will find itself in are all going to need, some industrial metals that are fairly widely distributed, like copper, nickel, aluminum, and silicon. Some precious, platinum group metals, which are again maybe not. They're precious. That doesn't mean they're totally rare. I mean, they're fairly available. But then there are these strategic commodities like cobalt and gallium and lithium and the rare earths that we absolutely are in a scramble to secure stable supply and create supply chains where the relative, it's called the spheres of AI power, they want their own supply chain. So if you go from a Google search, which you'd never thought about the energy consumption, you go to AI, suddenly you realize we're almost way behind where we need to be for the energy and data center infrastructure. And then you realize, in order for all of this to happen, I need more dams and more nuclear power plants. That's one thing. I also need
more chips.
More chips, and the chips need those very strategic commodities to make.
Because you refer to the data centers, but also it's because the AI will not be only what am I trying to say, that not only data centers will be the area, the place
where those chips need to sit.
Yeah. But or that the intelligence need to run.
Yeah.
Right. Bringing the ability to compute some form of information will be brought to a very local piece, whether it's your fridge or your phone or your whatever part of
any place where you consider automating is a place where you're going to need these strategic minerals.
Yeah.
And so
it's not just about queries and searches. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we go forever on where AI goes next and how you deploy that power. But then this podcast would take 3 hours.
Forever.
And neither of us are Joe Rogan.
Or capable of, exactly.
It's very funny, though. Anyway, sometimes I will see what Joe Rogan, and it's always about aliens and pyramids. And how anyone could be so fast, grown adults.
Obsessed with.
Aliens.
Yeah.
Anyway. This is a podcast about artificial intelligence, and he was just doing a podcast on non-human intelligence.
Okay.
We don't say aliens. We now call them non-human intelligence.
Okay.
Makes people think it's a more credible thing. Yeah. I can't wait for 2 hours of mermaid talk. So I guess for me, when I look at it, the knock-on effects of this scramble for resources, the scramble for energy, is a complete. I'm lost for words.
Not reinvention of supply chain, but putting in place the ability, the capacity to have access to these minerals in quantities that have not been levels that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, and the imperative and the importance and the level of concern that different governments are putting on this scramble for a secure AI supply chain is upending trade relationships all over the world. And if they haven't, if you don't think they have in certain corners of the world, it's coming.
Yeah, and not to turn this podcast into a political one, but it can be seen as a arms race, right? As
I
we
think
saw
it is
with
absolutely.
nuclear.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely an arms race.
Yeah, because China has not held back on their ability to build energy
in AI infrastructure.
capacity.
They are well ahead of everyone.
Yeah.
They're building coal plants. I know it's fashionable to say, well, they build all these solar panels so they're green. They're building more coal plant power production than the rest of the world combined, and they know they can do another great leap forward, using coal power to power their AI.
Yeah.
And hopefully we won't go down quite that path.
No.
And that we'll find other solutions. It's nice to know Canada has the third largest uranium reserves in the world, and I think I don't know. There's a calculation I did. Well, I did. Now I'm going to say I do it, but really I get Gemini to do it for me. But I wrote the question, so I kind of did the calculation. But just about how much energy the known reserves of uranium in Canada represents, and it's quite a happy number.
Okay.
It's an impressive number.
And I'll just go back to call it the headline, which
Yep.
you started this talking about the DeepSeek, because that's what has been the headline this week. And with DeepSeek, I read somewhere it says the U.S. innovates, China imitates, and Europe or the EU regulates. But here with DeepSeek, what was not shocking, but what made the industry, I think, lose something like trillions of dollars, which some of it came back, was, well, wait, there's innovation here, regardless of how it was done, and regardless of the cost as well. You could think, well, China has the advantage on the energy, U.S. has the advantage on the innovation, but China has demonstrated that it is highly capable as well.
So let's hope. Anyway, it's very exciting stuff. It's very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And I hope we can solve the supply chain issues around making AI happen, the physical, real infrastructure, without putting in jeopardy the rest of our economy, which does include freezers and factories and all sorts of other uses of energy. Because if we can solve this, we have all the resources. North America has all the resources it needs to do it and do it clean and beautifully. So let's just hope.
Which makes me think. My own. I wasn't using Gemini. I think I was actually using DeepSeek to talk about to inquire about this topic, and we see there's going to be a huge, as we've discussed plenty about the need for energy, but the technology also will improve in itself in terms of efficiency, right?
Yeah,
and
it'll get more efficient.
It will get more efficient, and training models and how it's where data lies and where the processing is happening will also make it. There are real initiatives so that these models do not consume as on a per unit basis as much.
How do some of those folks in Silicon Valley say it? Technology acts like a gas.
It feels
right. Like if I make it more efficient, I'm just going to use more of it.